Welcome back to Dragon Army Books. My name is Dustin, and I've got a problem. I've got many problems. One of those problems is that I'm a people pleaser. I like to please the people around me. I don't change who I am, but I like to listen rather than talk. I like to, this kind of starting to sound like one of those job interview questions where they're like, what's your weakness? And they're like, I work too hard. But the reality is I like to listen more than I like to talk. I like to ask questions more than I like to give answers. And I like to hear other people's opinions more than I like to necessarily create and give my own. So when I recently did a series on like must-read science fiction and fantasy books and released 4 videos where I talked about 5 books in each video of the classic and modern fantasy and sci-fi books that you must read, I was compiling a list of books that I generally think that other people would say, hey, these are the books that must be read. And so they were the books that were often talked about, often reviewed, often rated on BookTube and abroad. And I compiled those, brought those to you as my viewers. But those aren't necessarily the books that I would particularly choose or suggest to those of my friends that were asking for books to read. In fact, on that last video in the series, a viewer of mine, Rin, commented that I should do a new video about modern fantasy sci-fi books that are not commonly known or not talked about as much on BookTube, that maybe are more personal to me. I thought that that was a great idea. And while everyone has varied tastes on what makes a good book, and while I don't have a one-size-fits-all recommendation for anyone that I'm talking to, I do have a small selection of books that are my go-tos. They are my regulars. They are the ones that more often than not I'm recommending to friends, family members, co-workers, anyone that asks me. I have questions. I have a dialogue first to see what they like, what other literature they enjoy, what kind of tropes they enjoy, those kinds of things. But then when I get down to it, I have a small selection of books that I typically suggest. So here's my list of lesser talked about, lesser known books that you must read. In no particular order, we're going to start with Just One Damned Thing After Another. This is the first book in the Chronicles of St. Mary's series by author Jodi Taylor. I've raved about this series on this channel. In fact, my first author interview, and only at this date, was with author Jodi Taylor. And so you can check out that video, link is in the annotation. But I absolutely love this bubblegum pop science fiction light time travel through history series. I've called it bubblegum pop before because it's not the most engrossing literature of all time. The prose might not rival some of the prose from the authors in my previous lists, but it is functional. It gets the job done, and what is most interesting here is the humor. Now, I get it, humor is extremely subjective, and this is British humor. So if you like books and humor like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or The Princess Bride, then you might like Jodi Taylor's humor found within. It is a time travel series, although you shouldn't say time travel because these are researchers that study major historical events in contemporary time. Don't get it twisted. And so in each book, this small group of people travel in their pods to 2, 3, maybe 4 different locations in history. Some of these are major events that you and I would know about, and some of them are a little bit more obscure events that we don't necessarily know about. And when they travel to these places, they are just meant to observe and make sure that the events are as historical as maybe we recorded them in history. A lot of them are not. And history has a way of doing what history does, and the protagonist lead character, her name is Max. She's a lead researcher. Her and her team always get wrapped up in the most ludicrous moments of history. They can't change history. It's already happened, but they are often the people behind the scenes of history, bringing about the events that we know and were taught in our history classes. Next up is An Ember in the Ashes by my friend Asaba Tahir. I love this fantasy series. It is a good entry for some younger readers as well, and it's kind of a reverse of the science fiction book that I just talked about with Jodi Taylor because the prose here is absolutely gorgeous. Saba writes in such an entrancing manner that it really pulls you in. It's not over the top, but it is very illustrious. And so she really draws us in and then tells a compelling story about a young slave girl that's trying to rescue her brother. And then on the other side is this young soldier in training. And they're both under the iron fist rule of a martial empire. This is Saba's debut novel, and it has so many different elements that I absolutely love. I do wish there was probably a little bit more magic, although you get a lot of that as the series progresses. There is some romance, but it's not the focus. It's light, but what Saba does so well here is her characters, her characterizations, the relationships between these individual characters, and the hard choices that are being made throughout the story. You've got several different POVs, and several of these characters are on opposite sides of the conflict, and so it's interesting to be drawn to characters that are against one another. And so many of these relationships are so complex, and the decisions and choices that have to be made by the characters are gut-wrenching, and it's just a whole lot of fun. I absolutely love this book and the series and this author. And then we have the first entry in the Conqueror's Saga by Kirsten White. This is called And I Darken. It's actually a book that I talk about probably the least amount on my channel, just for a few reasons. One, it's been a long time since I've read it. Two, that's probably the only reason. But And I Darken is one of those rare titles that drew me in from the first page and didn't let me go until the last. I never had to convince myself to pick it up and to continue reading because I was so enthralled with the characters and the story and the unique setting in this book. My pitch for And I Darken and this series is as follows. It is an alternate retelling of the historical Vlad the Impaler, except Vlad is a young girl named Lada, and history is much more raw and real than our history books could ever depict them to be. The unfamiliar setting of Eastern Europe, the hard to pronounce words and titles and names, and the focus on politics and religion will all take some getting used to. But once you are there, you are in for a ride. Some of the best character work here, and the prose is similar to that of Saba Tahir's in that it's just it excels. It's a little bit over the top in a good way of like above average of how it flows and how beautiful and poetic some of it is, but the storytelling is so raw and real here as well. You're going to be gripped from beginning to the end. The next book is Sinlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This series is not yet complete. I believe that the fourth and final book comes out this year, so you can still hop on the train while the getting's good. Sinlin Ascends is an indie story in all of the right ways. Now, there are wrong ways to have and tell an indie story, and there are right ways to have and tell an indie story. Josiah does all of the right ways. Not only was it indie in that it began as a self-published novel, but it's indie in the sense of like when you listen to indie music, whether you like it or hate it, it's got a very unique kind of flair and flavor. And that is really infused into this story as well to some degree. It is a fantasy story with some light steampunk elements. I actually went in the very first time thinking it would just be a steampunk story, but what I got was something much more than that. It's an adventure. It's an adventure story in a really cool, brilliant, unique world of really just a single tower. Thomas Sinlin is on his honeymoon with his brand new wife, and they're visiting the archaic Tower of Babel, which is this sci-fi fantasy construct that a lot of people know about, but very few people have actually ventured to. Well, within the opening pages of the story, Thomas Sinlin loses his wife, and then he spends the remainder not only of the book, but of the series, ascending and descending this mysterious tower in search for his missing bride. Which leaves us with the African-inspired fantasy book called The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. I've of course talked about this book extensively on my channel, but it is still a brand new-ish book and a brand new-ish author that many people aren't yet talking about. It tells the tale of young military trainee Tao Solari, who is on a course of vengeance. He's got a lot of rage built up within him because of the untimely death of one of his family members. And so the rest of this book, and so far the rest of the series, is him seeking out revenge against the people that he holds responsible. There's a brotherhood that is formed here between Tao and his Scale Brothers, I believe is what it might be called. That is something that I love to read in these books. And then there's power leveling. Like, if you like video games, you're probably going to like this because there's a lot of grinding and power leveling. And then there's a lot of decisions that the lead character Tao makes that you're going to hate him for making, which might cause you to dislike him as a lead character. But all of that pain and that turmoil and the bad decisions are stuff that makes good, riveting drama for me. And I love the battle sequences and love the magic system, which is a magic system explored in a way that I haven't yet seen before. And simply suffice to say that it is Tao descending to the depths of Isiago, or hell, and that is where he fights and trains to receive his power above. These are 5 of my favorite and most referred books when it comes to science fiction and fantasy. What are yours? Please let me know down in the comments below. I'm always looking for new must-reads. Here's my list. Share your list in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch and like this video. If you haven't yet, click subscribe, join the Dragon Army, and we'll see you in the next one.